Well, good evening and welcome. I'm Anne Horn, the University Librarian and Executive Director Academic Support at Deakin University. Firstly, I wish to begin by acknowledging the Wathaurong people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered today and upon which Deakin's Geelong campuses are located. We pay our respects to them for their care of the land. We have with us here tonight the Vice-Chancellor, Jane Den Hollander, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice President Academic, John Catford. We may have, or they may be late, a number of members of local government. Welcome if you're here, members of the Deakin family, colleagues and friends. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone to the launch of this new exhibition commissioned by the Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Library to commemorate and coincide with the birthday of Alfred Deakin, which did fall on the 3rd of August, so in good tradition we're just a touch late. The exhibition has been designed to provide an insight into the man behind the politician and examine the private world of one of Australia's most intellectually complex Prime Ministers. I'll advise you tonight's event is being filmed as part of a record of the Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Library. It's now my great pleasure to invite Professor Jane Den Hollander, Deakin University's Vice-Chancellor, to formally launch the exhibition.
Thank you. I'll begin also by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land here on this beautiful part of the Corio Bay. It's an absolute delight to welcome you all here, and I pay particular mention to Judith, to Roger and David Harley, who are members of the Deakin family who are here tonight. And on Monday, I had the privilege of taking the Brooks end of the Deakin family around the exhibition, and it was interesting to notice they started to argue about a couple of things. So I don't know whether the Harleys are going to start contesting a few things, but it'll be interesting if you do, and you could compare notes. So thank you very much. It's a great privilege to us that we keep our connection to the family, and they are part of what we do as we grow as a university. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a delight to welcome you all here. This is an interesting exhibition, Alfred Deakin, Duty and Devotion. And I want to spend just a moment before I talk about Alfred Deakin, just to comment on the building and what it is that we do in Geelong. And if you look to the left and right of you, you'll look at these steel girders. And this is the Lascelles building. And those steel girders were built, were part of the very significant decision in the construction of this building. And if you go next door to the Dalgety building, those pillars are big blocks of wood. And if you read the history, you will know that that building, Dalgety's, was always seen as the better building. It was cooler in summer and warmer in winter because, of course, heat was not transmitted through the wood, whereas in this building, the steel helped quite significantly in terms of the heating and cooling of the building. However, the height, as you can see, and we've taken out some of the floors because in those days wool didn't have to go too far and people were smaller and they had 180 kilograms of wool on their back running up and down. So we've changed this. But the point is that the history lives on, is that what started off as, the wealth off the back of sheep, which made Australia what it was, and as a major and significant part of the empire, of course now is the centre of education. Deakin, 9th largest university in Australia. And today, this morning, I was at an event in Melbourne where we won our second laureate fellow, Professor Maria Forsyth. We're one of few universities, in fact 2, outside the Sandstones that actually have 2 laureates. And for those of you who are not into university parlance, a laureate is a seriously big deal. It comes with $2.5 million and a very significant recognition and acknowledgement of your excellence. And we have that in these buildings. And I think what I like most, if I comment to the family, is that from small beginnings, big things grow, and the university is well on the way. And of course, named after the second Prime Minister, has not done us any harm at all and has allowed us to be innovative and to be forward-looking and to take some chances and some risks with the things that we do in very much the way that our namesake did in his time. And today you'll learn some of that. So I'm delighted that you're all here with us. I'm also grateful to Professor Howard Frederick, who's agreed to speak with us tonight on the topic of Alfred Deakin as an entrepreneur. And I'm sure you're all looking forward to that presentation. And I'm sure for many of you, you would have been surprised to hear the word entrepreneur and might have thought more of Alfred Deakin, the great democratizer, Alfred Deakin, the great spiritualist, and there's many other things that you might think, but entrepreneur is our role tonight. And one of the roles of a university is to advance public knowledge. It's part of our commitment to the creation, advancement, transmission, and the application of knowledge and skills. And thinking of some of the things that our current Prime Minister has said recently around skills, I think it's very important that we always remember that skills often begin as unique and quite strange ideas and knowledge creation in universities, and ultimately end up as service transmission into the community through skills that we provide into that community. Tonight's events helps us make some of that commitment to knowledge creation and its transmission a reality. The exhibition I'm pleased to launch explores the private world of Alfred Deakin, the man behind the politician. Alfred Deakin was, as I said, the second Australian Prime Minister, and he served this role for 3 terms. He was one of the most intelligent and widely read Australian politicians, and I'm sorry to say that the idea of an exhibition such as this would probably have been quite abhorrent to him. Deakin stated, and I quote, "Public life in Australia is impaired by the almost entire absence of respect for the privacies of official life and for the persons of those in power." And he said that then. I wonder what he'd say today. I'm sure, like most of today's politicians and many Australians, Deakin struggled to maintain a balance between his public and his private life. He was an extremely private man and regarded his home and his family as sanctuary from the public world. So one of the most fascinating aspects of this exhibition is that despite the fact that Deakin lived over 100 years ago, contemporary audiences will find much to empathise with and much that they will find reflected in their own lives today. And I must say that when I was walking around looking at it before it opened, I actually did take note of a couple of quotes. 2 of them I used in India, where I was just recently travelling with Minister Evans, who's the Federal Minister for Education, Training and Skills, and used them. And in one of them, he actually said, "Where did you get that quote from?" And I went, Alfred Deakin. And it was quite a good moment to win, let me tell you. Shortly, Professor Frederick will be telling you about Deakin's travels in the United States, and I'm sure that those present who travel for business will have some appreciation and understanding of what such a trip would have involved at that time. To conclude, I'm sorry Alfred Deakin may have perhaps disapproved of an exhibition that explored his family, his schooling, and the more impersonal influence of his life. But I'm extremely pleased to know more about this most fascinating of Australian politicians, and I'm sure in the interests of our federation and the interests of our democracy and the interest in what makes Australian way of life the unique life it is, I'm sure that he's forgiving us as he twinkles down from wherever he is now. So for those of you visiting us here for the first time, and for those of you who are old friends, and there are many, I hope you enjoy the exhibition as much as I do, and that you take the opportunity to look over the library and plan for a return. Having a Prime Ministerial Library in your university is a unique thing. Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Library is one of the ones that will endure. There are a number around Australia, and we're absolutely delighted to have this. It's something to be cherished in Geelong, a regional city that has such a thing, and we should be proud of it. The library, the Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Library, is available to members of the community as a significant resource within the cultural precinct of Geelong. The library also provides access to many of Deakin University's library special collections, some of which are also on display tonight. So to Anne Horn and the librarians and the Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Librarians, thank you. It's a wonderful exhibition. These things don't happen easily. Some of what you see is quite outstanding and is part of our cultural heritage in Australia. So take care, look at it, enjoy it, and be very proud. Thank you for joining me. And so formally then, it gives me great pleasure to officially declare the Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Library exhibition, Alfred Deakin, Duty and Devotion, open. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. It's now my pleasure to introduce Professor Howard Frederick. Professor Frederick is a leading professor in the Centre of Entrepreneurship and Innovation and Community. This is a specialist research centre located within the Faculty of Business and Law. Howard is described in his biography as a multicultural, multilingual Stanford graduate with European, Latin American and Australasian experience. And he will speak to us tonight about Alfred Deakin as entrepreneur. Thank you, Howard.
Kaina we tato I whakawhete mo tēnei rangi, which is my way of welcoming you to the country in Maori language, because I'm actually an American New Zealander. Alfred Deakin, the dreamer, the believer, the achiever, known as father of federation, father of irrigation. My speech tonight is in the same vein as this exhibit, and it's a more personal look at Deakin the man. I'm a new Australian, new member of this university, and Australia's only professor of entrepreneurship education. My topic tonight is Alfie as entrepreneur, and that's the nickname which he bore in his closest circle. I think by the end of my talk you will see that Alfred Deakin, our university's namesake, was imbued with an enterprising spirit that we call entrepreneurship. But it cuts both ways. He was indeed a failed business entrepreneur, director of dubious companies and risking insolvency and bankruptcy. And it's a miracle that he didn't get discredited through insolvency as many of his friends did. But he was also a very successful social and political entrepreneur. Now, by coincidence, I came across Alfred's name mentioned in the same breath as the Chaffee brothers. If you've been to Mildura, you know about Deakin Avenue and the Chaffee Trail. Well, the Chaffees meant something special to me, and I'll explain to you in a moment. But through that connection, I dove copiously into this library, into the National Library, and it's amazing how many records there are to read of his life and by his own pen. I discovered that Alfred and I were actually connected, personally and emotionally, and this motivated me to examine his life as a social and political entrepreneur. In the course of this research, I discovered that Alfred actually traveled through my hometown, Indio, California, as he rode the rails through the wild, wild west on a research tour of America. I discovered, also to my delight, that he had many of the well-known traits of an entrepreneur. Before he went into politics, he was self-employed. He was a visionary and a dreamer of grand projects, an admirer of American entrepreneurship. One of the amazing discoveries I found also is that he was a very competent survey researcher. He constructed a 75-question survey, and he carried it out with dozens and dozens of respondents throughout the United States. I think he would warrant a posthumous DBA for that alone. What I found deeply impressed me, and I'm happy to share what I found with his family. Tonight I'm going to make the argument that Alfred Deakin was a very enterprising character. So what is an entrepreneur? So these definitions fit him to a T. Alfred Deakin was a person who habitually created and innovated to build something of value around perceived opportunities. That's a well-known definition of entrepreneur. Alfred Deakin pursued opportunity beyond the resources he currently controlled. Also a good definition. These characteristics of opportunity seeking, taking risks beyond security, and having the tenacity to push an idea through to reality all combined in Alfred Deakin to make him a singularly enterprising personality. It reminded me a bit of the Starship Enterprise, boldly go where no one has gone before. Alfred had that attitude towards life, the attitude of exploring and developing and leading and taking initiatives. Well, Alfie had a schoolmate, the sociable but cheeky Theodore Fink, who influenced Alfred's entrepreneurial affairs for good and for bad throughout his life. Theodore Fink was a born entrepreneur, and together with Alfie, they organized lotteries at school. So nibs and pen holders and blotting paper were auctioned off. They started a school paper together in which Alfred was a contributor. And Alfie emulated his friend by starting a club for essayists and also championing a law court at school. He went on to study law, but half-heartedly at Melbourne Uni. Not surprisingly, his law career was not too successful. I believe that early in life he recognized that he was not for compliance disciplines. He didn't want to manage someone else's affairs. He is what we call in social psychology a person that has a strong internal locus of control, which means it's where a person believes that he can control events, or better said, that the events result primarily from his own behavior and actions. This was very early the case when, through the brilliance of his oratory and writing, he came into contact with the famous David Symes, a media mogul before Rupert Murdoch, 50 years career, editor of The Age and The Leader. Deakin became Symes's journalistic protege, and this ultimately allowed him to earn a living. He was an omnivorous reader, an assiduous writer, and he filled endless streams of notebooks. I actually have his travel diary here of America, written in longhand. You have to get used a bit to his writing and to read it. So he excelled in journalism, and that became his major occupation for years before he went into politics. One of the rare things I found that'll interest you is that he used to write secret commentaries in the London press under the byline "Our Special Correspondent in Australia" for the Morning Post from 1901 to 1914. It would be as if Julia Gillard were writing on carbon politics and News of the World today. Very few people knew about this activity, even while he was Prime Minister. One of the few that did was the Australian Tax Office, because he diligently declared his £500 a year, but they kept the secret. Now, to my story, in the 1880s, northern Victoria was a sun-baked wasteland, suffering a severe drought, with much of the native scrub and native animals on the verge of perishing. Its only asset was the lazy Murray River, crawling across the sandy plain. Amazingly, settlers of the time prayed for rain and didn't use the river for irrigation. They scratched out their paltry subsistence back from the Murray's bank, sending their miserable product via steamboats to lonely stations in the lower South Australian reaches and up to Swan Hill. Ever optimistic over the ability to fight against nature, the Victorian Parliament in 1883 passed the Pastoral Leases Act, dividing the Murray frontage into small blocks to give access to water. This was at the time of the famous stump-jumping plow, which allowed settlers to irrigate and to plow the land, which the paddle steamers took great loads down the Murray. But the next step was, the quantum leap was to make these into fruit growing blocks. So this is where Alfred enters the scene. In 1884, he was appointed as President of the Royal Commission on Water Supply. Now, Alfred was spiritually what we might call a vitalist. It's an offshoot of spiritualism, which believed that science and engineering could indeed revive a long, still life force that had been shrouded by the melancholy silence of the inland Australia. We refer to that as the vital spark, or élan vital, which some equate to the soul, just as a human being is nothing but a mass of protoplasm. It needs that spark or the soul to ignite it. So through irrigation, Alfred felt that the gloomy legends of the interior wastes could be disproved. Irrigation also appealed to his notions of Jeffersonian democracy, which meant equality of opportunity by opening up land to smallholders while the state safeguarded their rights and property. It also appealed to him because of his promotion of temperance and civic virtue. So at age 29 years old, with Patty, his wife, and 2 journalists and an engineer, Alfred wasted no time and he set off for America by ship to investigate the miracle of irrigation that was occurring in California and the American West. What he found was indeed the blossoming of the deserts where hydro-engineers and waterpreneurs had made the sandy soil extremely productive with oranges, grapes, and even date palms, which is where I lived. They embarked in January of 1885 by steamer, first through New Zealand, then to Samoa, off to Honolulu, and arriving in San Francisco on the 26th of January, 1885. And thus began his investigative tour of America to view irrigation, dams, weirs, and canals. He even went as far south as Mexico City to look at the Aztec canals and lakes. And he and his entourage spent every waking moment examining irrigation systems from San Francisco to Boston. Now, you probably have seen images of 1885 on Hollywood movies. Deakin and his party used the marvelous train system at the time and luxurious Pullman coaches, and he remarks on sitting in red settees, couches, smoking a cigar and drinking whiskey as the Utah promontory goes by. So you can imagine what the mid-1880s was like. Ned Kelly may have been captured and executed, but the Wyatt Earp and the gunfight at OK Corral had not yet taken place. So Deakin's diaries are described as if a tornado struck paper. They are furiously scribbled, and it's sometimes difficult, right, Kristen, to, what is that word? It's so important, and I can't get it out of the context. So the furious penmanship reveals, obviously, a furious mind who is interested in everything from canals to opera. A map, I plotted out his trip across America in 1885. He started off in San Francisco, went down the fertile Central Valley of California to Los Angeles, carried down through the Coachella Valley, which is where I grew up, and through to Phoenix and El Paso, and on the way to Mexico City, where he viewed the Aztec lakes and canals. They then dashed across the deserts and prairies, touching down in Chicago to attend a play, before racing off Lake Erie to Buffalo and down through Niagara Falls. There's a beautiful postcard on the website of his view of Niagara Falls. Down to New York City. He was especially thrilled by the Brooklyn Bridge and the elevated railroad. He visited Boston to see the Boston Tea Party, and he went up to Concord, Massachusetts to see where the shot was fired, the famous shot that was heard around the world, which was the revolution against the British. But his most cherished writing is for his visit to Ralph Waldo Emerson's grave and to Walden Pond of Thoreau fame. In Washington, D.C., he visited the Patent Office, but then immediately dashed back to New York to see Much Ado About Nothing in the theater on Broadway. Back through Chicago, he diverted to Denver and saw other irrigation sites in Colorado, all the while taking in the opera. And finally, he crossed the Great Nevada Desert and spent some glorious days in Yosemite Valley and Lake Tahoe. Now, I've taken you across the continent, not speaking in detail of the most important meeting of the entire trip. You'll remember the words Chaffee Brothers sparked my memories. Shortly after he arrived in San Francisco, Alfred was advised, and by the way, he used telegraph and he used telephone for the first time, and he saw electric lights for the first time. Shortly after he arrived in San Francisco, he was advised to get in touch with the Chaffee Brothers outside of Los Angeles. On 11 February 1885, he met George and W.B. Chaffee, who had established the successful Ontario irrigation settlement. Now, east of LA, about 60 miles, is Ontario Airport. I don't know, Riverside, San Bernardino, it may mean something to you. But it was a sandy plain which had tremendous water pouring off the off the mountains. And the Chaffee brothers were Canadian water entrepreneurs and engineers who came in and watered the desert, made a fantastic orange, vine, and date industry, and of course sold property for 20 times the value they bought it with. They used the newest technology, which was steam-driven pumps and cement canals. They created planned towns, social institutes. Prohibition was a major feature of the colonies, and of course an agricultural college. So you can imagine Alfred's first meeting with the Chaffee brothers. After seeing hundreds of acres planted in vine and citrus, and seeing the land irrigated with the latest technology, recalling the drought in northern Victoria and the potential of the Murray Basin, Alfred would have said something like, "Boys, let me tell you about the Murray River." Now, he was an amazing communicator. And he was so persuasive that within 1 year, the Chaffee boys had entirely sold out of their California properties and bought 300,000 pounds to Melbourne and set up a London office as well. They were really foreign investors. So Alfred was very impressed by what he saw, both technologically and also in terms of the spirit of American enterprise. He said the most potent factor in the achievement of the American success is the untiring energy and self-reliance of the people who, unfettered by tradition and original in idea, have conquered difficulty after difficulty. So, affected by what he had seen throughout the US, he returned to Melbourne in 1885. By the way, when he was in San Francisco, one of the interesting comments was, he said, the warehouses are bigger than the warehouses on Smith Street in Collingwood, which is where I live. Anyway, he compiled a report called The Irrigation in Western America with immense speed, and it became a classic in irrigation literature. It still has pride of place in the Library of Congress on the Jefferson Reading Room. He oversaw the passage of the Water Irrigation Act of 1886, and his speech recommending this act to Parliament waxed eloquent on the potential for irrigation to develop Victoria into a haven of egalitarianism and liberty. In 1886, the Chaffee brothers received their go-ahead from the Victorian government on favorable terms. Newspapers in London ran ads attracting new settlers. And so 2 entrepreneurial ventures were set up, one at Mildura in Victoria, and curiously, the South Australian government caught wind of the Chaffee brothers and convinced them also to set up an irrigation colony at Renmark. So these sites were rundown cattle stations, but nonetheless had the soil and climate and potential water to be conducive to vines and citrus. Paddle steamers were available for local freight, but the railheads were more than 250 kilometers away in Swan Hill. Early progress was spectacular, and by 1890, there were 3,000 residents, replete with prohibition and an agricultural college in Mildura. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you know, there was a tremendous land boom and bust at that period, and the land boom collapsed in 1891. Capital dried up for further development. The river proved less navigable during a drought than they had foreseen, and land transportation of pip fruit to Melbourne proved to be problematic because of the bumpy tracks to the railhead. You can imagine peaches and apricots arriving with bruises at Queen Victoria Market. And the settlers did not adapt well to other products. They were not experienced in growing grapevines for sultanas, for example, let alone wine, because it was a temperate community. But the real catastrophe was not economic. It was the invasion of the yabby snatchers. The yabbies invaded the canals, took over the levees, burrowed under it, and destroyed everything. And one of the reasons was that the capital ran out and they couldn't line the canals with cement as they had done in California. So having expended their capital and unable to borrow, the Chafees filed for bankruptcy in December of 1895 amidst allegations that they were a gang of swindlers and had shaken down the Victorian government for their own gain. Of course, Alfred went on to greater things, became Prime Minister 3 times. One of the Chafee brothers, W.B. Chafee, stayed on in Mildura, and for 40 years he dedicated himself to the Australian dried fruit industry. But the major brother, George himself, the irrigationist, engineer, and entrepreneur, he was quite undeterred by failure, and I'm sure he delighted in thumbing his nose at Victorians. As he must have said, he said, "Boys, I have another project in mind. I'm going back to California. I'm going to divert the entire Colorado River westward into a valley," which he did. 4 years later, the All-American Canal, which is where I grew up, 400 miles of canals, and it's now called the Imperial Valley instead of the Colorado Desert because it was a marketing tool. And it's where they grow strawberries in the winter. Well, in the end, the Chafees are still revered, and the Victorian government eventually yielded to popular support for irrigation by bailing out the Mildura scheme. Alfred Deakin's vision of turning water into gold represented an entrepreneurial endeavor coupled with incredible resolve and the belief that he could bring the vital spark to the outback. This is from that Elan Vital. Alfred had many of the enterprising traits and behaviors that characterize what we call an entrepreneur today. He had an attitude to life, an attitude of exploring, of developing, of leading, of taking initiatives. He had the vision and drive to carry off one of Australia's largest and most important development projects. Yes, we might say he was a failed business entrepreneur. He was the director of many dubious companies, and due to lack of time, I'm not going to go into that side, but it's all in my paper. But he must be seen as a successful social and political entrepreneur. These characteristics of opportunity seeking, taking risks beyond security, and having the tenacity to push an idea through to reality all combined in Alfred Deakin to make him a singularly enterprising personality. So what remains in my speech really is to address my topic. Can Alfred Deakin's enterprising spirit ignite an entrepreneurial university? Now, I'm arguing through deaconography. Well, deaconography is probably one of the least studied prime ministers, and we really must raise the level of deaconography here. Through deaconography, we are rediscovering the enterprising legacy of Alfred Deakin. So what I'm proposing, and Jane has heard my words before, I'm proposing a new brand for our university, which is Deakin University Enterprising University. This would imbue us with the progressivism of our namesake. Now, students choose with their feet, and our university needs a distinct brand now, particularly in the post-Bradley era, to differentiate itself from the pack. Other universities around the world are seen as entrepreneurial universities making an active contribution and development to society and the economy. Alfred's enterprising spirit and his visionary achievements show us that we have a great legacy to live up to. Like Alfred's efforts in Mildura, we must attract talented and innovative people dedicated to discovery and innovation, just as he did the Chafee brothers. We must exploit innovations that serve the public good, just as he did steam pumps and canals. And we need to leverage ideas and discoveries for a better world, just as he did his philosophy of engineering and science. Well, I hope that these, my ideas about Alfred's enterprising legacy and the future of our proud university will provoke a conversation amongst ourselves and our stakeholders. In these times, few things would be more exciting than unlocking Alfred's promise. The vitalist that he was, if Alfred were alive today, he would argue that his enterprising spirit could finally reveal our university's shrouded life force. I've been communicating with Alfred, and he is asking whether we will let him provide that vital spark which is the soul of his university. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's my turn to talk about librarians as entrepreneurs while I have the stage. Our leaders of libraries today have to be entrepreneurial in their approach. They must read the mood of their communities well, perceive opportunities available, and position themselves to take advantage of them. And I acknowledge my colleagues Paddy Manolis, CEO of Geelong Regional Library Corporation here tonight, and Anthea Taylor, Institute Librarian at the Gordon, when I say this. At Deakin University Library, we have e-books and e-journals, wireless connectivity and 24-hour access to our online resources. We loan e-readers and laptops. We are E. And yet we have over 1.6 million visitors coming through our doors each year. We know that libraries remain central to our communities and central to a democratic society, and we position our libraries to bring the greatest benefit to the many groups we serve. I'm delighted that the Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Library is community-facing and provides opportunities for anyone to undertake personal research using all the technologies of the day, while at the same time fulfilling its important role of safekeeping special collections and records of the past. And for noting, one of our future exhibitions will be showcasing our rare book collection, which is unseen by most. Finally, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Professor Jane Den Hollander for officially opening the exhibition. It's been a very busy time and I'm very grateful. And Professor Howard Frederick for his address this evening. My thanks also to Kristen Thornton, Curator and Librarian of the Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Library and a resource in her own right, and Natalie Crawford from my office who has made tonight happen. I also acknowledge Sue Hodges Productions for their curation of the exhibition in consultation with Joan Moncrief, Associate University Librarian, Information Management and Access at Deakin University. So finally, you'll be pleased to know, thank you all for coming. There's more refreshments for you, and please enjoy the rest of the evening and take a look at the exhibition. Thank you all again.